What's up guys, my name is OhDough and today's video is going to be a guide for the Ostian repeaters in Dauntless. And the first thing I want to say is that repeaters are not ranged weapons in Dauntless. They are instead projectile weapons and they're played like shotguns. Honestly, if you want to play repeaters effectively, play them like any other melee weapon and stay as close as you can, because otherwise you're not playing them like you're supposed to. And that's for two reasons. The first is something called fall off damage. So repeaters have a mechanic where if you're too far away from Behemoth, you will not do the correct amount of damage. And fall off damage is indicated by either your damage being super low, aka the fall off, or your crosshair is not red. If your crosshair is not red, you are too far away and you must get closer. And the second reason is because of a mechanic called an empowered reload, which to perform an empowered reload, all you need to do is be close to a Behemoth and reload your guns, or repeaters. And in doing so, if you're close enough, you'll transfer Aether from the Behemoth to your weapons, granting yourself empowerment for a short duration. And empowerment makes your shots do more damage, and it makes your abilities have imbued effects that are more beneficial to you and in some cases your teammates. So those are two core mechanics that I want to make sure that everyone knows before they either play repeaters or that they know if they've been playing repeaters for a while and haven't been using them correctly. And before we go any further, I want to give a really big thank you to Dauntless for sponsoring this video. And if you haven't already, be sure to download Dauntless at playdauntless.com/r/OhDough. Getting back to repeaters, I want to go ahead and say that despite what you might have heard, repeaters are one of the strongest weapons in the game currently. If you can play them properly, they will reward you, and that is with very fast kill times and some pretty satisfying numbers when you're using them properly. But to play them properly, you must understand all of the different components that go into making a good repeater build. And that starts with the composition of the repeaters themselves. The Ostian repeaters are the most customizable weapon in Dauntless to date, and it's comprised of 5 modular pieces, and that is the barrel, the chamber, the grip, the mod, and the prism. Now, I'm going to go and explain these in order, starting off with the barrel. There are a total of 7 barrels, which are the Neutral, Inferno, Blizzard, Sylvan, Shock, Dawnstar, and Twilight barrels. And the main thing to understand here is that the power of the barrel adds to the damage of your repeaters. And to further increase the power of a barrel, you want to play it versus a certain element. So in this case, the Inferno barrel is very strong against Frost Behemoths, the Sylvan or Terra barrel is strong against Shock Behemoths, and the Dawnstar barrel is strong against Umbral Behemoths. And it's going to be vice versa for all those as well. So Frost against Fire, Shock against Terra, and then Umbral versus Radiant. Moving on to a more complex topic, we have the chambers, and every chamber that I'll be listing has a use depending on your needs. And the first chamber is going to be the full bore chamber. And this fires a piercing bolt in the line, dealing damage that falls off as it travels. Empowered. Deals greatly increased damage and pushes the Slayer backwards. This is going to be your bread and butter chamber for DPS on most behemoths. On behemoths that are really long or wide, this chamber can do some serious work. On behemoths that aren't so big or aren't so long, it's not going to do as well, but it still can do what you want it to do, and that's going to be damage. To get the max amount of damage, you must be positioned properly, and that's going to require you being at the head of the behemoth, aiming all the way down through the tail of the behemoth, because that will make it so the full bore chamber will be burrowed into the behemoth for the longest duration, making sure you can do the most damage possible. And it can be quite difficult to maintain the proper positioning using a full bore chamber, and that's why the salvo chamber is not a bad option either. The salvo chamber fires an explosive missile in a line, dealing 400 damage in an area upon impact. Empowered. Fires 3 missiles in a spread. So this chamber still does a lot of damage. It doesn't do quite as much as a full bore chamber on most behemoths, but it does do a decent amount. And this chamber is also easier to use, so if you find yourself not being able to get the effectiveness out of the full bore chamber, instead of using that chamber, I would suggest using salvo, because the only thing you have to really do with salvo is make sure you hit an unbroken part with the blast. So you're doing part damage as well as doing true damage to the behemoth, and when you get part breaks, it just gives you a nice chance to get more DPS in more safely. The last chamber will be Marksman, and the Marksman chamber fires a shot in the line, dealing 250 damage to the first behemoth hit. If a part is struck, that part takes 40% more damage from shots for 10 seconds. Empowered. Damage bonus increased to 80% and 25% to all allies. Now, I will say this chamber is the hardest to use out of all 3, because the other chambers just require you to hit the behemoth and that's it. But this one requires you to hit the behemoth on a part and then continue to hit that part for 10 seconds. And if you do that, you get rewarded with a lot of damage. But the behemoths move, behemoths run away, and they make it really difficult to hit that same part all the time. But in saying that, this is a very effective tool to use to break parts, and especially if you're in a team environment, you can make it so the part takes more damage from you and your teammates. And the nice thing is, it will mark the part for you and your teammates, but it will only mark it for your teammates if you have empowerment. So like I said at the very beginning of the video, make sure you're getting empowered reloads by staying close to Behemoth and reloading as close as you can be in some cases. Otherwise, you're wasting your ability and not getting the full effectiveness out of it as you could. Next up, we have the grips. There's only 2 of them, and the first will be the Captain's Grip, which launches a collectible buff a short distance, granting 20% increased attack speed for 15 seconds when collected. Empowered. Grants the same buff to all Slayers, aka all of your teammates. And this is the grip you should use if you're the only gunslinger or repeater player in your group, because this buff is super good and you want to have it for yourself and your teammates if no one else is running it. So if someone else is running repeaters and you know they're using this grip, go ahead and use the Saboteur's Grip, which is for damage. So the Saboteur's Grip launches an explosive mine that deals 400 damage. The mine charges after a short period, increasing damage to 700. Empowered. Deals 900 damage when charged and can interrupt behemoths. And for anyone that doesn't know what an interrupt is, it's basically what we call a boop. So some behemoths have an unstable attack, which is where they run at you, fly at you, or do something to that extent. And they'll have marks on their face indicating it's an interruptible attack. So this Saboteur's Grip can interrupt those attacks if it's empowered. And it can do it in 3 ways, which all of them have to actually connect to Behemoth, but aside from that, it can interrupt it by either fully arming, which takes some time, by throwing the mine at the Behemoth and making contact before the mine hits the ground, or by throwing it at the ground and shooting it, blowing it up in range of the Behemoth. And coincidentally, there is a mod that will increase your max range fall off by 25%, and that is going to be the Scoped Sights mod for the repeaters. I don't think it's a good mod, but it is there if you want to use it. But let's go ahead and discuss all the other mods, starting off with the Lucky Magazine. Lucky Magazine is probably the best mod for the repeaters, and that's because it gives you crit chance. You get 2% critical strike chance for each round missing from the magazine, and the repeaters have a 12 round maximum capacity for their magazine, so at 0 bullets you'll have 24% crit chance. And that's a very good thing, because if you're using your chamber at 0 bullets, it's a 24% chance for it to critically strike. So your salvo chamber, full bore chamber, and even your marksman chamber will do even more damage if you get that crit off. The next mod will be the Extraction Catalyst, which reduces both the cooldown on your chamber and your grip by 2 seconds when dodging through behemoth attacks. This mod is both effective and fun to play, and while it's not as good as the Lucky Magazine, it is very nice for the quality of life for repeaters, because it makes your chamber and your grip cooldowns shorter if you're dodging properly, and that just makes it more fun to play the repeaters because you have more buttons to press, in all honesty. And past these 2 mods, there's only one more that I would play sometimes, and that's the Lightweight Frame, which grants you 20% increased movement speed when you're at 6 bullets or less. And I only use this mod if I'm running Lesser Remain and trying to collect plants. Other than that, I will probably never use this mod. But past this mod, you have the Capacitive Magazine, which grants you 4 ammo when you're using an ability, and that includes your grip and your chamber abilities. And the problem with this mod is that yes, you get ammo back for using your abilities, which is kind of nice, but you do not get an increased duration to your empowerment. So what that means is that you'll get ammo back, but you have to get an empowered reload anyway, so the whole point of having the ammo basically fades. You can use one ability, and if you have enough attack speed, you will get effectiveness out of it. But then you have to cycle your grip and your chamber abilities instead of using them when they're off cooldown, which is the effective way to play repeaters. And for the last mod, you have Precision Sights, which makes you deal 8 increased damage when attacking the same part multiple times, stacked up to 5 times. So this is basically a budget marksman that doesn't have to be applied, but you do have to hit the same part constantly, and that can be a pain sometimes, and you're only getting 40 extra damage. So my advice is that you should definitely use Lucky Magazine or Extraction Catalyst over this mod. And honestly, I think that every mod is better than this one if you have access to them. And speaking of access, you will only have access to 3 of the mods by doing your masteries, which is at level 6 you get the Capacitive Magazine, level 10 the Scoped Sights, and level 16 the Lucky Magazines. Whereas the other mods are unlocked through quests. So my advice is use Capacitive Magazine if you have it, and then you might want to use Scoped Sights, it depends on your preference. But once you get either Extraction Catalyst or Lucky Magazine, use those mods over everything else because they're just better. And finally, we are to the Prisms of the repeaters, and after this section I'll be covering what cells are for the repeaters and how to actually play repeaters properly, which isn't too complicated after knowing all of this information. But anyway, for the Prisms, you will have 6 options, and some of them are pretty good and some of them aren't so good. But the best option will be the Searing Prism, and that is because on your 10th hit in quick succession, you will deal 250 bonus damage and major blaze damage. And this prism works even better if you have attack speed and damage modifiers, which I'll be discussing which ones you should be taking later on. If you don't have access to the Searing Prism, I would suggest using the Brilliant Prism, which once charged, your next attack will deal 550 bonus radiant damage, and the charge rate increases with higher current health. You could also use the Eclipse Prism, where dealing damage is a chance based on damage dealt to generate a Shadow Orb that increases damage dealt by 2.5% for 5 seconds. If you have 5 or more orbs active, the bonus doubles. And this prism would be better for repeaters, except your chamber does not actually proc any of the orbs. And that makes it hard getting a good orb count because repeaters are more for DPS than they are for damage. And their damage move is actually their chamber, and your chamber doesn't actually give you orbs like I said. So that makes this prism not that great for repeaters. Moving on, we have the Snowdrift Prism, where the last 4 shots in your magazine generate a Frost Sprite that cause your next attack to deal 50 bonus damage and minor frost damage. Max 4 sprites. This prism is for all intents and purposes a very budget Searing Prism that does frost damage instead of fire, or blaze. And it's, again, not a bad prism to have, but it's just not very helpful. Now the next prism will be the Stoneheart, and that is where you deal damage and you have a chance, based on damage dealt again, to grant a stacking, refreshing 40 health shield that lasts for 12 seconds. And just like the Eclipse Prism, your chamber does not affect how many shields you get. It doesn't actually contribute to getting shields, and for that reason again, this prism is not that great on repeaters. You can maintain some okay shields, but it's nowhere even close to what the axe can do with the same effect on the rockfall weapons. And the final prism is going to be the Glacial Prism, and this is honestly not good. So evading drops 6 ice mines on a 30-second cooldown, and evading just means dodging. So these ice mines don't do very much damage. It's just not good, and the only time you should ever use this kind of prism is if you're trying to do your masteries, and that's it. Anything past that, do not use this prism, and instead use anything else. Anything else and you'll be better off, trust me. So those are all the modular components of the repeaters, but now it's time to discuss the unmodular components, which are the cell slots on the repeaters. And you're going to have a technique and a mobility slot. And for the technique slot, you can use Predator, Evasive Fury, Molten, Cunning, Wild Frenzy, and Adrenaline. Because if you don't have access to a lot of cells, any of these cells will work just fine. But the cells I really suggest using are going to be Predator, Evasive Fury, and Molten. Because Pred is more damage. If you don't get hit, you maintain this damage. Evasive Fury is attack speed for dodging through attacks, and Molten drops Molten Hearts once you attack, and those give you attack speed, movement speed, and fire immunity. As for the mobility slot, I would go with Swift, Fleet-Footed, or Agility in that order. So Swift is more movement speed if you sheath your weapon, Fleet-Footed you get more movement speed after you dodge or do a roll, and that lasts for 3 seconds, and Agility reduces the stam cost on your roll. So those are the cells I choose for repeaters, and then moving past that, you have the power slot and utility slot for your other gear. And for power slot, you want to go with Overpower and Rage Hunter, and a lot of times you can't get both, so you have to kind of choose which one you want. Overpower is more damage versus behemoths if they're staggered, if they're interrupted, if you break apart, and those things happen pretty often, but just know repeaters cannot stagger, so you have to rely on breaking parts and interrupting behemoths. And then Rage Hunter is just more damage versus enraged behemoths, which is basically when they're red. And that happens on pretty much every behemoth, but there are 2 behemoths where this is not going to work out on, and that's going to be Riftstalker and Shroud, especially Riftstalker. So on these 2 behemoths, swap out Rage Hunter for Aether Hunter, and you'll have a much better time because Aether Hunter is more damage versus behemoths in Aether mode. And then finally you'll have Aetheric Attunement and Conduit. And for Aetheric Attunement, it just gives you more legend generation for your attacks, and it decreases the cooldown on your instant cast. Now Conduit is more attack speed for using your hold to cast. And I want to say this right now, attack speed is your friend on repeaters. It makes everything better. It decreases your cast time on your reload, your chamber, your grip throw, all that stuff. It just makes it much better, and plus you shoot faster, and it's just more fun to do. It makes the combat more, I guess, engaging. So I highly recommend getting a healthy dose of attack speed. At least get Molten, Evasive Fury and Conduit. Like, try and have 2 attack speed modifiers if you can. And for any cells I didn't list, I do have a video covering them very extensively on my channel. I'll leave a link to that in the top right. But now it's time to show you guys how to actually play repeaters. And there aren't any combos, so it's not going to be too hard to do that. You just, honestly, you hold left click a lot, you get close to the behemoth, you reload, and you throw your chamber and your grip on cooldown, and aside from that, that's how you play repeaters. And I didn't mention that repeaters have an automatic reload if you keep holding down the attack button, but I'm almost positive that's going to get removed in the future because it's really annoying. It is a very annoying thing that happens, and I'm not a fan of it. So I'm hoping it gets removed in the future. But anyway, guys, that's the end of this video. If you guys liked it, leave a like. If you want to subscribe to this channel for more Dauntless content, that's what I do here. And I also stream on Twitch at It's Just OhDough, it's my name, and I'm a very interactive streamer. I'm also a Dauntless partner. And I do have an Epic Games support code, which is just OhDough. So if you want to use that code in the store, it helps me out immensely. And again, thank you to everyone that uses that. And finally, if you guys haven't already, be sure to download Dauntless at playdauntless.com/r/OhDough. But y'all, that is it for me, and thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.